the amendment will be considered as read. The gentleman from Michigan is recognized for 5 minutes in support of the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My amendment is simple. It would restore two important provisions from the original bipartisan reauthorization bill that the chair, yourself, and the ranking member had agreed upon, which is now offered as an amendment by the ranking member, a bill that a group of Democrat members, I would note, in a knee-jerk reaction, senselessly rejected back originally in June. Well, the first provision is the program on China and transformation exports. This provision would focus XM resources to better compete with China's export credit agencies and channel more of the bank's support to the technologies of tomorrow. Second, this amendment would restore the XM restrictions on Chinese government-controlled entities in Chairman Waters' bill as written originally. The idea here is straightforward. At a time when China is diverting massive subsidies to its state-owned enterprises, specifically through the use of export subsidies, why would we want Export-Import Bank to make the Chinese Communist Party's job easier? And if a state-owned company is involved, let alone complicit, in Beijing's abuse of human rights or its debt trap diplomacy and Belt and Road Initiative or the militarization of the South China Sea, then why would Export-Import Bank subsidize that same company? It's one thing if a U.S. exporter sells to the Chinese government legally on its own, but it is another thing to devote taxpayer-backed financing to Beijing through the Export-Import Bank, freeing up resources for the Chinese government to pursue objectives that may be counter to our national interest. Supporters of the Democrat proposed bill we're considering today will claim that their bill does prohibit XM financing for certain Chinese companies, such as those on the entity list. But guess who was not on the entity list as recently as 6 months ago? Huawei, a company that XM had authorized deals for in the past. Even as recently as 3 months ago, Huawei had dozens of non-U.S. affiliates who were not on the entity list. Even if the Democrats' proposed bill had been the law of the land at that time, XM could have financed those same companies. ZTE is no longer on the entity list, nor the denied persons list. But wait, there's more. XM has previously financed China's own Export-Import Bank. This is despite the fact that China sits on $3 trillion in reserves, and despite the fact that Chinese XM has handed out more than 1,800 loans to Belt and Road Initiative projects totaling more than $149 billion. XM has also provided finance assistance benefiting China's largest semiconductor manufacturer, and it has done deals to help China Ocean Shipping Company, known as COSCO, the state-run shipping behemoth that is crucial to China's maritime Silk Road Initiative. Last, but certainly not least, XM has financed exports for Xinjiang, where between 1 and 3 million religious and ethnic minorities have been subject to mass internment and surveillance. Other countries are now coming to terms with this problem. Without objection, I'd ask unanimous consent to enter a news article from October 17th to the record discussing Target, Australia, and the Cotton On Group's decision to stop using cotton from Xinjiang. Due to the Chinese Communist,
such is the order.
Thank you. Due to the Chinese Communist Party's forced labor and abuse of human rights in that region. Under the Democrats' bill, however, XM could continue to finance exports to state-owned companies in Xinjiang, including the inputs it needs for the cotton and textiles industry. My amendment would make this impossible. My amendment would also require XM's users to attest that they do not punish or restrict their own employees' freedom of speech in personal communications when it comes to Beijing's abuses in Hong Kong and Western China. If you punish an employee who stands with Hong Kong, you shouldn't expect U.S. taxpayer assistance. Finally, Madam Chair, this amendment would extend the prohibition on XM financing to the government of the Russian Federation. Some might argue that as long as a Russian company isn't sanctioned, the bank should be able to subsidize it. But are they happy that XM approved financing for Gazprom before it was sanctioned? Or that XM improved financing for Sberbank before it was sanctioned? What about VEB, the state-owned bank for which XM authorized assistance a mere 7 months before Treasury put it on the sanctions list? The gentleman from California, Mr. Sherman, offered an amendment to this year's NDAA blocking transactions for Russian sovereign debt. There's no reason why Democrats should want to clamp down on sovereign debt on one hand while allowing U.S. government lending to the Kremlin on the other. Madam Chair, with all these provisions should be utterly uncontroversial to all of our members, and I urge support of my amendment. And with that, I yield back.